Hello everyone. So in this lab exercise, I'm going to give you an introduction to Azure networking. And this is a complete hands-on lab on Azure networking introduction. And within this lab exercise, we are going to create virtual network and subnets. We're going to create DNS settings in Azure, and we are going to create a couple of virtual machine placed under these virtual network. And we're going to use the global vNet peering to connect these two resources. And let's go and do that. Let us go ahead and create those virtual networks and the subnets we talked about. You can create these resources in multiple places. You can either go to the global search box and type in the resource and select the resource and create it, or you can click on create a new resource here and you can create one as well. Another option is go to the resource group and you can create the resources within your resource group itself. So this is the resource group what we are going to use. I'm going to click on create here to create our first resource. So within the search box, type in virtual networks and click on create. Make sure you have your right subscription selected and the resource group. For the resource group, you have another option. You can create a brand new one if you choose to do so. So we're going to select an existing one. The first VNet we are going to create is for the core services. And within the core services VNet, we're going to create these subnets as well. One for the gateway, one for shared services subnet, database subnet, and public web services subnet. The region we are going to pick is East US, and the network address range is 10.20.0./16. So let's keep East US as the region. That's what we want. And click next for IP addresses. Under the IP address tab, you can see by default the range which is given is 10.0.0.0/16. We are changing it to 10.20.0.0/16. This is going to give us enough IP address. Scroll down until you find add subnet. Click on add subnet. The first subnet we are going to create is gateway subnet. So give a name for your gateway subnet, and the subnet IP address range is 10.20.0.0/27. We're going to leave rest of the information as default as of now. We're not going to select any NAT gateway or any service endpoints. We'll come back to those later. At the bottom, click on add. Now we have created the first subnet. Click on add subnet again, and this time we're going to create shared services subnet. Give a name for your shared services subnet, and subnet address range is 10.20.10.0/24. Again, click on add. Now we have our two subnets created. One more time, hit on add subnet. This time add the database subnet and give the address range as what we want, which is 10.20.20.0/24. Click on add. And the fourth subnet we are going to create is public web service subnet. And the IP address range we are going to give is 10.20.30.0/24. And click on add. Now we have all the subnets we need to create for the core services virtual network. To complete the whole process, click on review and create. This will go through a validation, and after validation, you can click on create. Okay, validation is being passed. Click on create. All right, so our deployment is completed. Click on go to resource to see the VNet you created and the subnet. So on the left hand side of the page, you can click on address space to find out what's your VNet address space. And you can click on subnets to find all the subnet you just created and the available IP address within those subnet. Now that is completed, now head back and create the next VNet, which is manufacturing VNet. And within that, we are going to create this VNet in West Europe, and the IP address range is 30.0 instead of 20. And we are going to create another 4 subnets within the manufacturing VNet. So I'm going to go back to home. This time, click on create a resource. I'm going to type in virtual networks and select the virtual network. Click on create, and I'm going to select the existing resource group we've been using. Under name, I'm going to give this time manufacturing VNet, and the region, instead of East US, we're going to select West Europe. So select the region and go to IP addresses. So this time instead of 10.0, we are going to put 10.30.0.0/16. And after that, click on add subnet. The first subnet is manufacturing system subnet, and the IP address is 10.30.10.0/24. Click on add another subnet. This time it is sensor subnet 1, and the IP address is 10.30.20.0/24. Click on add the third subnet. The third subnet is called sensor subnet 2, and the address is 10.30.21. Click on add, and the last subnet is sensor subnet 3, and the IP address range is 10.30.22.0/24, and click on add. So we have all the subnets created or needed for the manufacturing VNet. Click on review plus create. After the validation, click on create. While that is happening, let's look at the third requirement. The third requirement is to create a research VNet in Southeast Asia, and the IP address range is 40. And we only need to create one subnet in the research VNet. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so our resource is created. Let's quickly check the subnet. Yep, all of the subnets required is created. Now I'm gonna go back to home and this time search for virtual network. Click on create a virtual network. I'm gonna select an existing resource group we've been using, and under name we're gonna give research VNet. That's our third VNet we are gonna create. Under region, this time we have to place it in Southeast Asia. So select Southeast Asia as the region. Go to IP addresses. The range this time is 10.40. So type in 10.40.0.0/16. Scroll down till you find the subnet. You don't have any subnet by default. And create your first subnet. The subnet is research system subnet, and provide the subnet address range. And click on add. Click on review plus create. After the validation, click on create. Let's go to resource and check the address space, which is 40. That is what we wanted. And subnet, we only need to create one subnet for the research subsystem. Alright, so our task is completed. So we wanted to create 3 different VNets for this company. The first is the manufacturing VNet. We had to create 4 subnets. East US region, we have to create the core services VNet, which had another 4 subnets. In Southeast Asia, we have to create a VNet and a subnet for the research system subnet. Alright, so let's go and do another exercise. In this exercise, what we are going to do is we are going to configure DNS name resolution for a Contoso Limited company. And we will create a private DNS zone named contoso.com and link the VNets we just created for registration and resolution. And then we create 2 virtual machines and test the configuration as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So now that we have created all the subnets and the VNets we need, let's go back to the home page. This time on the global search box, type in DNS. So select the private DNS zones. Under the private DNS zone, click on create. We are going to keep the same settings what we have been using so far. So let's select the existing resource group. Under the instance details, give the name for your private DNS zone. I'm going to call it as contoso.com, and click on review plus create and click on create. Looks like our resource is created. Let's click on go to resource to verify if it is created. Alright, so our contoso.com zone or private DNS zone is being created. Now the next task is to link the subnet for auto registration. So to do that, go under settings and click on virtual network links and click on add. So under the subscription, leave the default subscription and expand the virtual network. We have to create the auto registration on the core services VNet. So select the core services VNet and make sure you select the configuration to enable auto registration and hit OK. Oops, I forgot to give the link name. So the first task is to give the link name. So I'm going to call it as core services VNet link. Scroll down and click OK. So right now it is creating the VNet link with auto registration. While that is creating, now let's go and create auto registration on other two VNets as well. So click on add, give a name for your link. So I'm going to call this time it is manufacturing VNet link. And under virtual network, I'm going to select the manufacturing VNet and scroll down until you find the configuration and make sure you enable the auto registration and hit OK. And I'm going to create one more. This time I'm going to call it as a research VNet link and select the VNet as a research VNet and repeat the same step what we have done in the past to exercise to enable auto registration and hit OK. Alright, so now it is deploying the other two VNets. As you can see that one of the link has been successfully created and auto registration is being enabled on virtual network, which is core services VNet. So we'll wait for another couple more minutes to complete the whole step on all three VNets. Alright, so looks like all three of the VNet has been enabled for auto registration. So that task is complete. Now we have completed by creating the private DNS zone. We created the link subnet for auto registration. The next task is to create a virtual machine to test the configuration. So let's go ahead and create a virtual machine. So we're going to create the virtual machine using the PowerShell. So I'm going to use the Cloud Shell. You can find the Cloud Shell by clicking on this Cloud Shell icon. So you can create a virtual machine in multiple ways. I have created many videos in the past showing you how to create the virtual machine using the GUI. So right now I have a template, so I'm going to use the template to create it. Alright, so the deployment of the virtual machine is being executed. So let's go to virtual machine and see if we can find anything. Yep, we can see that there are two VMs is being created. One is a test virtual machine 1 and test virtual machine 2. Both are created under the resource group we just talked about. And both of these virtual machines are in East US. Right now it is been creating. You can see other details like what's the size of the virtual machine. Alright, so both the virtual machines are created. You can see the status changed from creating to running. That means the virtual machine is created. So let's go and verify the records are present in the DNS zone. So on the Azure portal, let's go to the private DNS zone. Select the private DNS zone we just created. Click on the overview tab and scroll down. Now you should be able to see both the test VM, which is automatically registered here, and it has the A record and the value, which is IP address, which is registered for these VMs. Now that is been completed. Now let's go and connect to test the VMs using the RDP connection. So go to virtual machines, select one of the virtual machine, which is I'm going to select test VM1, and at the top click on connect. So I'm going to connect via RDP. So click on RDP. So you can connect the RDP via public IP address. So click on download RDP file and click on open, connect. Provide the username. The username is test user and the password and hit OK. Yes. Now that our test VM1 is launching, I'm going to go and connect to test VM2 as well. Go back to the virtual machine. This time click on test VM2. Click on connect, download RDP file. Make sure you select the public IP address and click on download RDP file and open the VM2 RDP file. Click on connect. Provide the username, put the right password and hit OK. Yes. Alright, so now it is connecting to the test VM2. So let me minimize that, put it to the side. Our first VM is booted up and the second VM is booting now. So let's see if we can connect to these both virtual machine using ping command. So let's go to run and go to command prompt and try to ping the second VM from the first one. So I'm going to execute command ping test VM2 with the DNS name .contoso.com. The request timeout is because the Windows firewall is enabled on the VM. So let's go to the VM2 and go to the command prompt and ping the test VM1. So the request timeout is expected because the Windows firewall is on. Alright, so congratulations. So you have created the private DNS zone and added a name resolution and auto registration link and tested the name resolution in your configuration. Now that we have completed the second exercise, which was about DNS zone registration, in this exercise, we are going to learn how to connect to Azure Virtual Network using global vNet peering or global virtual network peering. Let us look at the task we are going to perform. First, we are going to create a virtual machine to test the configuration. Then connect the test VM using the RDP. We're going to test the connection between these two VMs and create VNet peering between core services VNet and manufacturing VNet. That's the important task. And then we are going to test the connection between the VMs as well. So let's go and do that. So first step is to create a manufacturing virtual machine. Like the last exercise, I'm going to use Azure Cloud Shell to create it. And I'm going to execute the command to create the virtual machine like last time. So in the background, now it is creating a virtual machine in the manufacturing VNet subnet. So let's minimize this. Let's go back to virtual machines and we should be able to see another virtual machine creating in some time. Let's do a quick refresh to see if something is happening. Yep, I can see that I'm going to minimize the Cloud Shell. So our command is being executed. You can see at the top, we are creating a brand new virtual machine, this time under the manufacturing department. The status is creating, and again, it's a Windows virtual machine, the same configuration as the other two VMs we created. So let's wait for a couple more minutes to complete this. All right, looks like our virtual machine is being created and it changed the status to running. So we can go back to the virtual machine and log in to the virtual machine for the first time. Under overview, click on connect, select RDP and make sure you select the public IP address unless you are inside your organization network, and click on download RDP file. And this time we are going to open the manufacturing VM RDP. Click on connect, give a username, give the right username and the password. Click OK and click yes to connect to the virtual machine. So let's check the IP address of this manufacturing virtual machine. So I'm going to go to PowerShell and run the command called ipconfig. The IP address of this virtual machine is 10.30.10.4. So let's minimize that. Now we know the IP address of the manufacturing VM. I'm going to go back to our test VM in the core network. So I'm going to go back to the virtual machine. This time I'm going to go to test VM. That's in a completely different network altogether. Click on connect and click on RDP, download RDP file and open. Click on connect. On this virtual machine, I'm going to open the PowerShell and test the IP address. All right, so the IP address of the test virtual machine 1 is 10.20.20.4. So let's keep it aside. All right, so now we have two virtual machines. One is the manufacturing VM and the test VM. Both are in two different VNets. If I go back to the initial diagram, I can quickly show you. Our first VM is in the core services VNet and VM is placed under the subnet, and the second VM is the manufacturing VNet that is placed under the manufacturing system subnet. So we don't have any VNet peering in between. So technically, if you try to connect or ping these two virtual machines, the connection should fail. So let's go and find out. So on the manufacturing VM, I'm gonna try to connect to the VM1. Type in testnet connection, the IP address of the first VM, which is 10.10.20.0.4. We're gonna connect via port 3389. Now it is testing the connection or attempting to connect via TCP. We should ideally get a test connection fail message. So the message here is TCP connect to the virtual machine 1 is being failed because there is no connection between these two networks. If we try to do the same connection on the other virtual machine, we should get the same message again. Test net connection. I'm going to type in the manufacturing IP address 10.30.10.4 and port 3389. Hit enter. And we should get a similar message because there is no connection between these two networks. All right, so we get the fail message. Now let's go and create the VNet peering between these two networks. So on the Azure portal, go back to your home and you can go to your virtual networks. First, let's select the core services VNet. Under settings, scroll down till you find pairings and select that. So we don't have any pairing yet, so click on add. Under the peering link name, give a name called, we are trying to create a connection from the core services VNet to the manufacturing VNet. So I'm going to call it as core services VNet to manufacturing VNet. Traffic to remote virtual network, I'm going to select allow, which is default. And traffic forwarded from virtual network, I'm going to enable allow, which is default. And virtual network gateway or route server, I'm going to keep it as none. So that's the first part. So the first part is this virtual network. The next part is the remote virtual network. Now we have to fill the details for the remote virtual network. First, provide the name, which is this time it is manufacturing VNet to core services VNet. Virtual machine deployment type as resource manager. Subscription, keep the existing subscription. Under the virtual network, select the manufacturing VNet because that is our remote or the VNet we are trying to create or the VNet we are trying to connect. And I'm going to keep the rest of the value as default, which is traffic to remote virtual network allow and traffic forward from virtual network or the remote virtual network is allow. And virtual network gateway or route server is none by default and click on add. Now that our peering is enabled, let's go refresh this page. So we are under core services VNet. Under peering, we can find that there is a peering created. The status is being updating. So at the same time, we can go to the other virtual network, which is manufacturing VNet. And under settings, go to peerings. We should be able to see that there is a peering created and the status is connected. Let's go back to the virtual network and to the core services, peerings, hit refresh, and the status is changed to connected. So now we have the peering connected between these two VNets. So now let's go back to the virtual machine. We do have these two virtual machines anyway here. I'm going to execute the command one more time. So we are trying to connect to VM1. At the same time, I'm going to the VM1 and we are going to try to connect to the manufacturing VM as well. All right, so the connection is successful. So as you can see that the VNet peering is been successfully enabled. So congratulations. So you learned how to connect two networks using VNet peering or virtual network peering or global VNet peering. I will see you on the next hands-on lab. Until then, take care.